David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I'm coming to you today from very, very sunny and extraordinarily hot Las Vegas, Nevada, where I am for the Mass Torts Made Perfect conference, as I often am every 6 months. And the conference doesn't actually start till this evening, so I'll have stories and progressive media conversations to report to you probably in tomorrow's bonus show. But for today, yesterday, my travel day, Jen Briney from Congressional Dish Podcast filling in for me and doing a great job. Major news day, and I didn't even know where to start. Last night, I thought I had what were going to be the major stories today. And then this morning, of course, it was tweet o'clock very, very early this morning, and we have even newer stories. So I will talk about Paul Ryan resigning momentarily. But first, I want to talk about just an explosion that Donald Trump had on Twitter against Russia, against Syria, appearing to issue threats and sort of throwing and this is something we've not talked about that much, throwing the rest of the diplomatic world into chaos because other countries just don't know if when Trump says something, it's going to be policy and therefore whether they should take action. And I'll explain. Donald Trump came out seemingly of nowhere, just swinging big league against Russia on Twitter this morning. It relates to Syria. It relates to Assad. It relates to Vladimir Putin. Trump starting with his first tweet many hours ago now, where he said Russia vows to shoot down any and all missiles fired at Syria. Get ready, Russia, because they will be coming nice and new and smart. You shouldn't be partners with a capitalized gas-killing animal who kills his people and enjoys it. And Trump continuing on Twitter this morning. Our relationship with Russia is worse now than it has ever been, and that includes the Cold War. What would Trump know about the Cold War? There is no reason for this. Russia needs us to help with their economy, something that would be very easy to do, and we need all nations to work together. Stop the arms race? So, okay, at this point I'm thinking Mueller's getting closer. Michael Cohen's office was just raided. His hotel room was raided. We'll talk about that later in the program. This might well be sort of public posturing to make it look as though Trump has no problem whatsoever criticizing Russia. And then he goes directly in on Mueller as well in the third of the series of 3 tweets saying much of the bad blood with Russia is caused by the fake and corrupt Russia investigation headed up by the all-Democrat loyalists or people that worked for Obama. Mueller is most conflicted of all, except Rosenstein, who signed FISA and Comey letter. No collusion, so they go crazy. A multi-layered analysis, a multi-pronged and almost infinitely branching analysis is necessary here. So very quickly, the idea that it's just Democrats that are doing the Russia investigation that Robert Mueller is running is ridiculous. I mean, we're talking about lifelong Republicans. We're talking about a totally transparent attempt to make something seem partisan, which really does not appear to be in any way. But that's not really where I want to focus today. The first part of this is if we take Trump at face value, right? Trump says Russia shouldn't partner with Assad. No one should partner with Assad. Okay, well, I get that, and I actually agree with that. That's not really a controversial thing. Assad is a terrible, terrible guy. Now, it looks like Syria is moving aircraft to a Russian base in the Mediterranean Sea. There's a lot of activity. And to the extent that we take Trump's comments at face value, I would say, hey, this is actually it's still a very neoconservative position. It's still a very the U.S. is the policeman of the world position. But at least on the morality of it, I agree with Trump. But then we get very quickly to, do we really believe that Trump is announcing policy? Is there actually policy in what Trump is saying there? And that's what our allies just don't know. And this is why there is this sort of diplomatic crisis that's going on. And a number of people have spoken very eloquently about this. If you are Japan, for example, and you see that Trump says, if Syria does this and Russia does that, we're going to do this, and this is sort of the approach, and it's announced on Twitter. If you're Japan, you have diplomats all over the world. If you're France, you have diplomats all over the world who now have to sort of account for how will your country's geopolitical policy respond to or exist in the context of this recent pronouncement from the President of the United States. But is it a real pronouncement? Do we believe that this is actually the policy that the United States is going to carry out? Because so often when Trump says something on Twitter, then we hear, oh, Mattis was out of the country. He doesn't even know what Trump's talking about. He wasn't consulted. He's not even here. Shouldn't have been announced. We don't even know if it'll be policy. Or we find out that Rex Tillerson has actually been negotiating on the basis of the opposite of what it is that Donald Trump announced on Twitter. It is a diplomatic crisis for our allies and even not our allies around the world. And how is that to be dealt with? And then we get to the double standard. Do you remember that Donald Trump slammed President Obama when Obama was president and said, I would never say what we're going to do because that's how we lose. I would keep it secret. Obama should never put timelines on anything. He should never tell anybody what it is that the United States is going to do. Hillary Clinton, she's going to just give away our strategy. I would never do that. The strategy would be in secret. It would never be announced. And yet here is Trump on Twitter saying exactly what it is that he would be doing. If A does B, the United States will do C. Imagine if Barack Obama had tweeted, I don't know, like on that infamous day when we got bin Laden, watch out, Pakistan, we're going to get bin Laden. He is a bad and sick guy. Don't hide him. It's ridiculous at its face. And the idea that now Donald Trump is doing on Twitter the exact thing he said that other presidents shouldn't do, that he wouldn't do, that Hillary would do, it's ridiculous at its face. So bottom line, there are sort of two possibilities here. One is Trump's entire criticism of Russia and his rant is completely bogus and BS. But there's actually a more sinister one, which is that Trump believes that sharing our military plans helps other parties. Like when Trump said, when Obama says what we're going to do, it helps the enemy. It's possible that Trump believes that, and he's doing this on purpose because this is only political posturing and bluster, and he's effectively giving Syria and Russia a heads up. I hope that Trump is feeling so cornered by Mueller that he's going to try to act more reasonably now. But tough tweets are not actual action. Saying things on Twitter isn't actually a counterpoint to anything that Trump has done. And it doesn't tell us a thing about what it is that Trump is going to do. And of course, the Trumpist base just eats this stuff up. And it may be a calculation to counter the Mueller narrative. In the end, if Russia and Syria move all their planes and their weapons elsewhere and the United States ends up striking, I don't know, another empty airfield that reopens within 12 hours, has Trump really done anything against Russia or Syria? The answer is clearly no. And I wish we could say more, but we just don't know. The era of policy, or at least policy ideas being announced on Twitter, has effectively made it so that we can't actually trust that what the president says is going to become policy. Very, very weird time that we're living in. We've talked about how more and more Republicans have been opting to retire and not seek re-election rather than risk being taken out, maybe by a Democrat, maybe by a non-Trump affiliated Republican. And this is all as a result of the damage that Trump has done to the Republican Party. We've seen a number of Republicans say they're not going to run for re-election. This morning, we learned that this phenomena goes all the way to the very, very top because Republican Speaker of the House Paul Ryan, the third in command in the United States political hierarchy, is not running for re-election. And of course, Ryan is telling a very, very positive story, saying he's leaving Republicans in good hands. He's had 20 years. It's a good run. He wants to spend more time with his kids. But this is not like the beautiful riding into the sunset that Paul Ryan is trying to portray. And there is every indication here that there is major panic in the Republican Party. And the decision even surprised many Republicans that Paul Ryan wasn't going to be running for re-election. As soon as Paul Ryan announced, which was broken earlier today, Republican Congressman Dennis Ross of Florida also said he is going to be retiring. And Speaker of the House is just not a position you bail on if it appears that you've got sort of a clear sailing path to maintain it. And that doesn't mean that Paul Ryan's explanations aren't valid, right? I'm sure he wants to spend more time with his family. I think his daughter was like an early teenager when he became Speaker of the House. And, I totally get it, right? He wants to spend time with his family. He has been in there 20 years. But most people would decide to stick it out just a little bit longer if they have a clear opportunity to make it another couple of years in a position of such power. And it isn't even clear that Republicans are going to maintain the House at all, never mind Paul Ryan and his specific seat. And if they did maintain control of the House in the midterm election, would it be a productive context for such a beleaguered, to borrow a word from Trump, a beleaguered Speaker of the House, in the sense that many Trumpists aren't loving what Paul Ryan has been doing? It's going to be a very interesting midterm. And actually, I don't know if you've been following the Iron Stash, Randy Bryce. Randy Bryce is a Democrat who's running against Paul Ryan in his district in Wisconsin. It was understandably sort of a long shot candidacy. Bryce was building momentum and he has growing name recognition within the district. But running now, rather than against Paul Ryan, running against or in an open seat election in Wisconsin is a very, very different scenario. And if you're in Wisconsin and you're thinking about getting involved in a race there, it would be an amazing victory to not only take out a Republican seat, but the one previously held by the Speaker of the House, the retiring Speaker of the House, and bring that back to Democratic control. So we'll be watching that particular race. I will also be watching sort of the ripple effect over the next 2 or 3 weeks of more Republicans saying, I want to be with family, or I want to move on to private law practice or become a lobbyist or whatever the case may be. I would predict in the next 2 to 4 weeks, you're going to see even more Republicans sort of put their finger in the wind and feel the direction that things are going and join Paul Ryan in this. And as I mentioned, Trumpists might not actually be upset that Paul Ryan isn't running for re-election, because many of them see Ryan as a sort of non-Trump friendly force in the Republican Party. So I think many of them would actually cheer it. Send me your thoughts. What do you think that Paul Ryan's retirement, resignation, call it what you will, means about the 2018 midterm elections, and even more broadly, sort of about the future of the Trump presidency? I'm on Twitter at @DPakman, and the show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Kirill Tsonev. Kirill, thank you for signing up at davidpakman.com/membership. I can't tell you enough how much it means when people sign up. Every time someone signs up, I get an inbox ping because we get new subscriber emails. And every time it happens, I immediately think, that's a really good person that's supporting independent media. And there's people that are new to the membership program like Kirill. There's also people like Ray J. Jr., who has been with us since February of 2012, almost 6.5 years of membership. And a big, big thank you to both our new members and our sustaining members. You can use the coupon code VOTESOON18 to save 40% off of your membership. And you can also make a pledge on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. And all of that helps us continue to grow the program and improve programming. All right, even though I'm in Las Vegas, Nevada today for the Mass Torts Made Perfect conference, we're not taking a break from Hatriot Mail. Hatriot Mail persists even during remote broadcasts. And if you're not familiar with Hatriot Mail is when a professional voiceover artist does interpretive readings of the hate mail that I get. Here's a little bit more about what this is.
The right of the people to keep and bear hate shall not be infringed. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
This week's Hatriot Mail has something that we have never, ever seen before, which is a multilingual Hatriot Mail. We've seen things that sound like other languages because of poor spelling and grammar in Hatriot Mail before, but we've never actually seen that I can remember an actual Hatriot Mail that is clearly including other languages. And I think that that's all that I'll say about this week. So let's take a listen to it and see if we can make heads or tails out of it.
David Pakman, socialista gran puta di merda, and a sucker to boot. A good commie is a dead one. Your race explanation is full of logical fallacies. Between Raquel Madcow, Mr. and Mrs. Deliverance, Matthews, and Humpty Dumpty, you're right up there with the lying, phony, fake, never report the truth news out there. One more cover up for the corrupt Democrat Party.
I would translate what is being said here in some kind of combination of Spanish and Italian, but translated to English, it would get our broadcast affiliates in trouble. So I'm not going to do that. I am interested, though. They refer to other media people. So I know Raquel Madcow is clearly Rachel Maddow. Mr. and Mrs. Deliverance, I have no idea who that is. Matthews, I assume, means Chris Matthews on MSNBC. And Humpty Dumpty, I also have no idea who that is. So I don't know what the media diet is of this Hatriot. But what I can tell you is that if you don't like that perspective, if you actually think that independent media like the David Pakman Show is worth supporting, there's a coupon code, which is a big middle finger to the Hatriots. And that coupon code is Hatriot40. When you go to davidpakman.com/membership and you type in the coupon code Hatriot40, Hatriot40, you save 40% and a Hatriot cries. And I think that that's something that a lot of people like. And shockingly, I only mention that coupon code once a week when we do Hatriot Mail. And it is our most used coupon code, period. More people are signing up with that coupon code. So clearly there's something that resonates with our audience about giving a proverbial middle finger to the Hatriots. So congratulations and thank you to everybody who's using that code. Major news out of the Robert Mueller investigation. The FBI has now raided the office of Donald Trump's personal attorney, Michael Cohen, as well as his hotel room at I believe it's the Park Plaza Hotel or some very, very nice hotel in New York City. And according to the New York Times, the FBI has seized business records, emails, and documents related to several topics, including payments, plural, to pornographic film and nude actresses and models, meaning in code, Stormy Daniels, also known by her real name, Stephanie Clifford, and Karen McDougal, who was interviewed on CNN by Anderson Cooper not long ago. Of course, Donald Trump immediately saying that this is all very, very un-American. He said it's disgraceful. He said it's an attack on our country in a true sense. He also said that the FBI broke into Michael Cohen's office and that this is all a witch hunt. And I can't think of any of those statements containing really any truth. I mean, first of all, Trump says it's disgraceful. I don't know why it's disgraceful, sort of a very subjective term. Trump says that the FBI broke into Michael Cohen's office and hotel room. Well, broke in. They had a search warrant approved by a judge, right? And Trump says he's all about law and order, and that's how the system in the United States works. As far as it being an attack on our country, that's odd, since this is something that FBI Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller referred to prosecutors. Prosecutors evaluated what Robert Mueller gave them and went to a judge for a search warrant. The judge looked at what the prosecutors had and approved the search warrant, and then that search warrant was carried out in accordance with the laws of this country. And how that's an attack on our country, I really don't know. But there's a lot of really interesting things underlying this. Number one, as I mentioned, Mueller referred part of his investigation to other prosecutors instead of handling it himself. That is very important because Trumpists like to say Mueller has delusions of grandeur. He doesn't know the limits of his investigation. He doesn't know the scope of his investigation, and he goes beyond it to no end. This is proof that Robert Mueller clearly does realize that some areas are outside of the scope of his investigation, since this is something that Mueller chose to refer to other prosecutors. So anyone who says Mueller has assumed for himself a mandate without any limits is clearly wrong, because here is an example of Robert Mueller saying, actually, this I'm going to give to other prosecutors to look into. Secondly, I find it so interesting that Donald Trump says the FBI broke into Michael Cohen's office. They had a warrant. So what they did was completely legal. Now, when Trump says that they broke in, he might be referring to this being a no-knock warrant. I don't know if it was, but a no-knock warrant would be one where the FBI, law enforcement officials who serve the warrant, don't announce themselves politely and say when we come in, right? They force entry, sometimes breaking a door down. If that's true, then Michael Cohen and Trump need to be really worried, because when you ask for a no-knock warrant, you're doing it because you believe that if you just quietly come to the door and say, could we come in and examine your business records or whatever else, you believe that the target might destroy evidence. You believe that the target might also even become violent. And I guess with what we know about Cohen, both are possible, but more than likely, it would be the evidence thing. And that's really not a good sign for Michael Cohen. And in any case, the idea that a president of the United States thinks that a warranted, the serving of a warrant approved by a judge is a break-in is weird, to say the least. And again, they say that they're the people of law and order, and they don't seem to know how law and order works in this country. And what we can gather from the fact that this took place, especially if it was a no-knock warrant, and again, I don't know if it was, because Trump's using the term break-in, it makes me suspect. We have to sort of translate from ignorant to English to figure out what Trump means, and I'm wondering if a break-in means a no-knock warrant. All of this clearly met a very high threshold of potential criminality. Mueller said, I'm referring this to outside prosecutors to look into. The outside prosecutors did look into it and agreed there's possible criminality here, and we need to go to a judge for a search warrant. They went to a judge for that warrant, potentially a no-knock warrant. The judge then looked at the evidence and said, yeah, I'm approving the warrant. And I actually think that that's one of the areas where the Trumpists are sort of missing when they talk about a witch hunt, and that this is just partisan people who are trying to hurt Donald Trump and his administration. Look at all of the different people that were involved here in looking at evidence and saying, let's move this to the next step. It's just absolutely ridiculous to think that this is just partisan. And also, I'm sort of disappointed because I had Jared Kushner on FBI raid bingo. I thought Kushner was going to be the next guy to be raided, and I lost. So I'm out $20 at this point. As far as next steps, certainly a possible Michael Cohen indictment is possible. There's the possibility of Donald Trump taking actual aggressive Syria action as a distracting mechanism. And I mentioned at the top of the show when I told you that Donald Trump took to Twitter and unleashed this outrageous tirade laced with random capitalization, as is often the case, criticizing Russia, threatening Syria. I said it's possible that this is political posturing. It's also possible that this is a preemptive distractathon, and Donald Trump might actually take big action here because of what's going on in the Mueller investigation. There's another New York Times piece which points out more specifically the focus here being the Stormy Daniels payment and the Karen McDougal payment, although they are not always mentioned by name. And there are people reacting and saying, this can't possibly be serious because it relates to porn stars and Playboy models. That's the exact opposite approach. The logic is backwards. Regardless of whether this involves Playboy models or porn stars, it must be serious if it's leading to a judge approving a raid after prosecutors go to that judge to ask for the warrant, potentially a no-knock raid, as I mentioned. I know that this is very much on the minds of lots of people in our audience, and I hope you'll participate in discussions about this story and all of the other stories from today's show on our subreddit, which you can access at davidpakman.com/REDDIT. We'll take a break, coming to you today from Las Vegas, Nevada.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
So it's been a few days since I updated you on this new initiative to expand the show. The gist of the expansion is that what we would like to do to really further solidify staffing on the program and also allow us to continue producing shows during vacation, so that instead of periods during which there are no new shows, we can kind of have a rotating staff to continue production. I want to add a new producer position to the David Pakman Show. And what we also want to do is reduce the amount of commercials in each episode, which will give us more time during our hour sort of broadcast time clock to do additional political content. And in order to do that, the goal has been to add 500 new paid supporters of the show, be it through membership, Patreon, or YouTube sponsorship. And I am very pleased to tell you that as of this morning, we passed the 150 new supporter mark. So the goal is 500 new supporters, and we are now beyond 150 new financial supporters. And that means we are inching closer and closer, and I hope that we make this a reality soon. And I do think that that would also really kind of improve the show's standing with our affiliate stations. Affiliate stations understand that we're a small operation, so that when there are vacations, there are no new shows. And even if they understand it, they don't like it. And they often say, David, it would be great if you figured out a way where you could be on vacation and there could be a guest host, and then you could come back and you could have a fill-in producer so that everybody can still get their breaks, but you can continue producing. And that's exactly the goal. So there are 3 ways that you can participate. All 3 count equally towards the goal of 500 new financial supporters. Number 1 is membership. Membership is the old tried and true method of supporting the show dating back to 2010. You can go to davidpakman.com/membership. Monthly and yearly memberships are available. If you want a discount off of your membership, you can use the coupon code VOTESOON18. That will save you 40%. You get all the great member benefits, including the daily bonus show. You get the commercial-free audio stream, the commercial-free video stream of the show. That's membership. Very, very straightforward. Second method that will help get us to 500 new supporters is Patreon. Doesn't matter how much you have to contribute, even if it's $1 a month, which is the minimum on Patreon, it still counts as one of those 500 new supporters. You can go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show and hit the orange Become a Patron button. Also great perks on Patreon. At the $5 a month level, you get the bonus show. And at the $10 a month level, you get not only the bonus show, but also the commercial-free video show every single day. And a third option, this is something new, and it's perfectly fine as well. It counts just as much towards 500 new supporters. We're part of a YouTube beta for what's called YouTube sponsorship. YouTube sponsorship is $4.99 a month. It has its own set of benefits, including a sponsor-only icon next to your name in comment and chat posts, as well as sponsors-only posts on YouTube. You just hit the sponsor button on either the YouTube channel homepage or on any internal video page. You can sign up. It doesn't show up 100% of the time since it's in beta and YouTube is sort of testing the algorithm. It doesn't always show it to every visitor to our channel, but it'll eventually be there. And over 150 on the way to 500. And there's lots of other things I would also love to do, by the way, when we get this new producer. There's 3 to 5 new platforms that the program has been invited to participate in that we just don't have the capacity right now to post our content to. I'd love to be putting content on there. We're sort of maxed out with current staffing. So this is really, this is a big deal. Adding this position will allow us to do about 25 more shows a year. It will extend each show on a daily basis by about 10% because of the advertisers that we will pull off of the broadcast show. And it will basically open up the door for new opportunities, new platforms, things that I haven't even told you about because I know we don't yet have the staff bandwidth to do that. So let's make it happen. Membership, Patreon, YouTube sponsorship. I'll have an update maybe at the end of the week. Okay, let's talk about Fox News' Laura Ingraham. You might recall that Fox News host Laura Ingraham took what sort of seemed like an abrupt vacation after about a dozen of her advertisers stopped buying ads on her show. as a result of her comments about David Hogg. David Hogg is a student from the Parkland, Florida high school that suffered a mass shooting a few weeks ago. And David Hogg himself, after Laura Ingraham did this, called for a boycott of her show, an advertiser boycott of her show on Twitter and on a dozen or more, really dozens of companies that were advertising on her program. And before her abrupt vacation, about a dozen of those companies had already bailed. And then she very, very quickly announced that she was taking a week off for Easter. It's possible that that week off was pre-planned and it just wasn't mentioned. It might not have been. The timing of it was pretty weird, but she did return, right? That was part of the question, because when Bill O'Reilly ultimately lost his program on Fox News, he took a very sudden week or two off. Was it a week or two? I don't remember. And very quickly thereafter, the show went away. But Laura Ingraham did come back, but not to good news. And in fact, the number of advertisers dropping her show increased from 12 to 20 by the time she was back for her first post-Easter break show on Monday. And that's at least 20 advertisers that have dropped her show that we know about. And the latest one here is Allstate Insurance. The difference seems to be that Allstate is kind of being more subtle. So there are companies that when they decided to drop advertising with Laura Ingraham, they tweeted about it, they put out a press release about it, they made it known that they were pulling ads. And if media reached out to them to say, are you pulling ads? They would say yes. Allstate is taking a bit of a different approach. They've not been answering questions. They were asked to confirm that they pulled ads, and they said, we've taken note of your concerns, which isn't an answer at all to the question of, are you still answering advertising on the program? They were asked, are more ads scheduled to run on Laura Ingraham's show? And Allstate said, we cannot answer that question. So they might be taking the more subtle approach, which is they're dropping the ads, but they're not making noise about it. Ace Hardware took that approach. Men's clothing store Joseph A. Bank said, listen, we were never actually buying on Laura Ingraham's show. We were buying generally on Fox News. But Joseph A. Bank ads have sort of mysteriously or not so mysteriously disappeared from Laura Ingraham's show as well. And I'm kind of mixed about this, the subtle strategy of pulling the ads. Because on the one hand, I like the idea of just pulling the ads quietly, not making a big hubbub for publicity and just saying, we're just not going to fund the program anymore. But it can also be sort of a calculated thing, right? Because you might say, well, pull the ads. The people that are paying close attention to who's advertising will notice it and they'll reward you. They'll be happy, right? The people who are on the sort of the side of David Hogg. But by subtly pulling the ads without making an actual announcement about it, maybe the people that would boycott you for pulling the ads won't notice because you're not drawing attention to it. In any case, the pulling of the ads is a good thing. And there's still people saying these are limits on free speech. This is a form of censorship. It's just such a bogus perspective and a misunderstanding of what censorship and free speech really are. I was actually talking yesterday about this with Sam Seder, host of The Majority Report. It's good not to fund propaganda. It's good not to fund people who criticize students at high schools that suffered mass shootings, right? It is objectively good. And people will say to me, but David, you could be hurt by that same sword. That's a double-edged sword. If I support the boycotts by advertisers of other programs to the point that those programs could go out of business, I also could be the target of the same type of advertiser boycott. Listen, if I say something that is so upsetting to people and so disturbing and so horrible that my audience activates, or people not in my audience, and go to advertisers and say, look at what David said, pull your money. If I'm saying despicable things, then the case can be made that I deserve to be boycotted and that my speech has consequences. And my speech having consequences is not the same as some kind of blanket censorship or restriction on free speech. And people will remind me of YouTube's adpocalypse. That was not a targeted boycott of me for the things I said. It was horrible, and I am completely against what happened, and everybody knows the extent to which it hurt the program during 2017. But that was something that happened across news and politics. It happened to conservatives and liberals, and it was about advertisers becoming sort of skittish about having their ads appear on edgy content or controversial content. That is completely different than me saying something and then that speech having consequences. And advertisers are free to make the choice about where to support me, whether to support me or not. We have a good relationship with the advertisers that we have. And who would I be to say you can't decide on the basis of my content whether or not to keep advertising? So good luck convincing it to the fans of Laura Ingraham. This has nothing to do with censorship. This has nothing to do with free speech. This has to do with companies with a profit motive making decisions using whatever barometer they have, whatever rubric they have, to decide where do we advertise and where don't we advertise. And I'm glad that 20 or more advertisers are saying we're not going to advertise with Laura Ingraham anymore. Give us a like on Facebook, facebook.com/David Pakman Show. We will take a quick break and be back with more after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Well, we have yet another resignation in Donald Trump's staff. This time it is another security advisor, not national security, but Homeland security. His name is Tom Bossert. He was the Homeland Security advisor of Donald Trump, and he is leaving because the newest national security advisor, John Bolton, is just not pleased with the idea of Bossert staying in his role. And Bossert was previously deputy NSA national security advisor to George W. Bush. And say whatever you want about how Bossert handled the Hurricane Maria response in Puerto Rico. This is at least a guy with actual experience, and he's pushed out almost immediately after John Bolton is hired. And on policy, there's one item to discuss about the firing, which is Bossert was one of the stronger voices in the administration who seemed to understand the cyber threat from foreign countries like Russia. He was one of the people in Trump's administration most pushing for and working on deterrence of future cyber attacks from foreign countries like Russia. He's gone now. And I wonder, will his replacement have the same priority of stopping future Russian hacking? I don't know. You take a guess. And Bolton comes in and immediately pushes out one of the most knowledgeable people on the issue of cybersecurity. And it just sounds kind of weird. And to people who will point out, well, listen, Bossert isn't exactly a top tech genius. There's this amazing story of, in 2017, a fake Jared Kushner, someone impersonating Jared Kushner through email, contacted Bossert, and Bossert totally fell for it. And yet he was still one of the strongest guys Trump had on stopping cyber attacks. That's how bad things are. I get it. This guy maybe was not the absolute brightest, but we're particularly vulnerable right now to cyber attacks, including from Russia. We are a known target. And the guy who at least seems to take it seriously, making whatever comments you want to make about his competency, gets pushed out. And the broader story, of course, is that the White House is kind of being run like a temp agency at this point. Major people are resigning and being fired, sometimes ultimately being indicted, as is the case with Donald Trump's first former national security advisor, Michael Flynn. Rex Tillerson out, major position, the top diplomat for the United States around the entire world. Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price out. Recently, the VA Secretary, David Shulkin. I mean, I'm not going to go through the entire list because the list is extraordinarily long at this point, but we wonder, how is it that such young people are considered senior staff in the Trump administration? It's because after 6 weeks, you have major seniority. And the types of people that last a long time, I mean, look at who they are, right? Kellyanne Conway has been around for a while. Bowling Green Massacre, kowtowing to whatever it is Donald Trump wants, totally willing to go out there and just tell bold-faced lies on TV. Sarah Huckabee Sanders has been around for some time, although she has had her moments with Donald Trump. It's not always completely clear how much longer she's going to be around. Stephen Miller, who seems willing to tell the most depraved lies and justify the completely indefensible. When you look at the types of people that last under Trump, it's basically people who either don't think for themselves or are willing to completely suspend any of their personal views on what's going on to just do what it is that Donald Trump wants. And I know that it's sort of a silly question to say this, but it actually does get to a real issue. Trump said he would hire the best people. He'd surround himself with the best people. Did he mean right off the bat, or did he mean after firing the people he initially hired? I don't know the answer. I know it sounds like a joke, but if someone could answer that, I think it would be an interesting thing to know. What exactly did he mean by hiring the best people? And the Bolton connection does make me suspicious that Bossert isn't enough of a hawk for the next wave of Trump foreign policy. And indeed, Bossert has reportedly been saying recently that the U.S. can't really be the world's police force and that getting involved in military conflicts all over the place isn't something we should be doing. That's exactly what John Bolton is known for, right? So the writing is increasingly on the wall there, and I think we should all be extraordinarily concerned about yet another person being pushed out, not because we think of Bossert as some genius, but because of sort of what it seems to represent in terms of Bolton coming in and saying Bossert has to go. We haven't done any Pat Robertson clips lately. Pat Robertson is the host of the religious show, the 700 Club. He's famous, at least to me, for his list of dozens of items that can be demonic and have demons attached to them. This includes secondhand sweaters and Ouija boards, yoga, Harry Potter books. All of that stuff can be demonically possessed in the world of Pat Robertson. And one of his other sort of key identifying characteristics is that Robertson is blisteringly homophobic and against gay rights. And he had some commentary on a recent show, this is so weird, where he said that he and his movement, if you can call it that, are being dominated by homosexuals. And the context was left-wing bias and universities. And here is just the very oddly worded analysis that Pat Robertson came up with.
When you get right down to it, Christians still are the overwhelming majority in this country. And, you know, we have given the ground to a small minority. You figure lesbians, 1% of the population, homosexuals, 2% of the population. That's all. That's statistically all. But they have dominated the media. They've dominated the cultural shift. And they have infiltrated the major universities. It's just unbelievable what's being done.
Why is everything so odd with Pat Robertson? The guy's 88 years old. The show won't stop. And every bit of the vocabulary he uses, the domination by the homosexual community. But the argument is actually one I'm interested in. I know it's just sort of another silly, crazy old Pat Robertson clip, but this is a really interesting argument that he makes, which I want to talk about. He basically is saying, how has there been so much progress in the world of LGBT rights, despite the fact that actual members of the LGBT community are a tiny, tiny percentage of the population? And of course, there's lots of reasons why, right? It's the correct and decent thing to do. There's this thing called empathy, where even if you're not a member of the LGBT community, if you identify an injustice, you can say, I'm going to activate and work against that injustice merely because it is an injustice, even if it doesn't affect me personally. But Pat Robertson seems to think that it's wrong that so much, as he says in this country, is being tailored to this tiny minority. And I thought, well, if you're going to make that argument, why does the NRA get to dictate the conversation that we're allowed to have on gun safety, even though they represent the interests of a small portion of all gun owners who themselves are only a portion of all of the people in the United States. And what Pat Robertson is effectively complaining about here is that as a society, we're going in the direction of treating LGBT people like they are just normal people, which of course they are, despite the fact that most people aren't LGBT. And that is a really, really difficult thing for Pat Robertson to get his mind wrapped around. To him, it might feel like domination not to be able to, for example, ban same-sex marriage, or not to be allowed to fire someone merely because of their perceived or actual sexual orientation, which, by the way, you can still do in a lot of states in the United States, and it's a major problem we've got to continue working on. We're fighting against people in Pat Robertson and his ilk who believe that merely not discriminating is a form of oppression, and that's a really tough thing to change someone's mind about. In fact, I don't really know how you do it. With Pat Robertson, I mean, he's 88 years old. You probably can't change the guy's mind. The most effective method for younger people like Pat Robertson to change their mind more than likely is just personally knowing members of the LGBT community, knowing them as people rather than as activists on television or as policy positions or as someone that has what they would see, I guess, as an anti-Christian point of view, which I disagree should even be the framing. But even a lot of them are probably beyond reach. So anyway, Pat Robertson dominated by gays. I know it's a sort of weird way to get into the topic, but I think it's actually an interesting one, which is that it's logical that we would defend the rights of the minorities, even if we aren't by definition part of those groups, right? I mean, it's sort of the same thing. Like the 1964 Civil Rights Act, it was something that the majority participated in, even though it applied specifically to the minority. Why is that so shocking? Like, why is it so crazy in Pat Robertson's worldview that people outside of a group might still defend and activate for the rights of that group? Very difficult, I guess, for Pat Robertson to understand, but kind of obvious for someone like me who just seems to be able to empathize with the positions of others. We've got a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a sort of interesting question that came in. Take a listen to this.
Hey, David. Two questions and two quick comments. I wanted to ask, who is your least favorite mainstream media personality, and who do you think does the most damage? And as far as our comments go, I've seen a lot of people referring to Fox News as state-run media, but I'm wondering if it actually makes more sense to think of it the other way around, given that Trump gets most of his policy ideas from Fox News. We actually have a media-run state. And then I just wanted to say, I think that Michael Cohen seems like a really, really dumb version of Saul Goodman. He's like a sleazy lawyer kind of guy. Except he seems to be really bad at it. But yeah, thanks.
Okay, so a lot in there. So let me address the last part. Yeah, there is something in Michael Cohen that is reminiscent of Saul Goodman, the character from Breaking Bad and from Better Call Saul. I don't think you're wrong about that. Okay, now, as far as, let's work backwards, because I'm leading up to the toughest question. I think it is more accurate to say that we have a media-run state. Fox is controlling so much of what the president of the United States focuses on, thinks about, and works on because he watches that show, and it's just abundantly clear. So I don't think Fox is state-run media. I think that we have a media-run state. That is a very, very good point. Who do I think is the worst corporate media personality? You know, I don't remember all of them offhand, but I think that Judge Jeanine Pirro is absolutely one of the worst. And I've talked about her before, and I know, Hannity has a bigger reach, and he says horrible things, and the Fox and Friends people are doing major damage because Trump watches them. But there's something about Judge Jeanine Pirro that to me makes her one of the most vile corporate media people out there, but it's close. I mean, there's probably a dozen people. Brian Kilmeade is absolutely and totally horrible. That Trump guy, I don't know if he's Jeffrey Lord. I don't even know if he's still on CNN, but he was on there all the time in the lead up to the election. Absolutely vile and depraved guy. I don't know. There's a long list, but Jeanine Pirro is certainly near the top of the list for me. We've got a great bonus show for you today. We will talk about a new court decision that says women cannot have prior salaries used against them for future job negotiations. A report says that under 1,000 people attended a game between the Rays and White Sox at Guaranteed Rate Field. Interesting name. And we will also talk about a transgender runner ruling that relates to the upcoming Boston Marathon. So a lot of interesting stories, including some local Boston stories. And I will also tell you what's been going on here in Las Vegas, Nevada. Get the bonus show by becoming a member at davidpakman.com/membership and or by becoming a patron for at least $5 a month at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. I will speak to you on the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.